Since we are running on quite a tight schedule, I think we can start actually. So my name is Christopher Friedrich. I'm working with EAWAG Sandec, which is the Swiss Federal Institute of Aquatic Sciences and Technologies. And I will be one of the moderators of this session. I want to warmly welcome all of you. Today's session will be about quite a pressing topic that is becoming more and more relevant for us these days, which is climate-induced migration or displacement. We have with us today quite a lot of interesting speakers and representatives of different organizations of quite a lot of different contexts. We try to choose very interesting case studies from a variety of contexts where climate and water security and displacement play a role. Just to lead you through the program a little bit, we will have a key message by Stuart Wallis, which is from the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation from the humanitarian aid branch of this. Then we have an intro where two colleagues from Deltares will set the scene on our topic today. Afterwards, we will have interactive interviews with our three representatives of the case studies, which are namely, so one case study is Bangladesh, one context is Iraq, and another context is Uganda, where we will have 30 minutes interviews with these representatives. So 30 minutes in total, 10 minutes each. Afterwards, we will have breakout groups where we will go into more detail about the certain case studies and where the participants will have the opportunity to voice their questions and contribute to the discussion on these different case studies. And we'll try to actually come up with some interesting input that will also help the people of these case studies to kind of go further into the future. And hopefully everyone can contribute to that. Afterwards, we will have a presentation of the breakout groups outcomes, and then the closer of the session. We only have 2 minutes spare to run over time, so I'll end here and hand over to Stuart Wallis.
Yes, hello. My name is Stuart Wallis. I work for Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation, humanitarian aid. I've been working for them for about 10 years, and I'm often seconded to different organizations, UN organizations in the field. So I've mostly been field placed for the last 10 years. And it's been very interesting to see how much climate adaptation has become important in our work. I think it was seen as, by me and probably many other Europeans, as a specifically thing that we do when we go abroad. And I think the events of this summer have brought home to all of us in Europe that climate change is impacting us very much here in Europe as well. You can see that with the flooding in Germany. I saw it myself in this summer when I was hiking at 3,000 meters in the Swiss Alps, where a glacier has disappeared. Just 5 years ago it was there, and now it's not there anymore. So I think we have to give much more focus to the warnings of the IPCC 6 report. We have to take much more action, and we have to work much more sustainably. And sustainability, I think, is one of the things that we should focus on. We work in protracted crises, and we also work in countries that we go back to more than once for different crises. I think we should be very conscious that each of our interventions has a carbon footprint. If we don't work sustainably, and then that just means that we are increasing the amount of energy that we need to interact in each crisis. So we have to think about sustainability, and I think another thing we have to think about is technology. We have to work more across the board in different to link different water, sanitation, health, energy, and shelter solutions. And SCC is very happy to support the Geneva Technical Hub of the UNHCR, which will hopefully bring all of these competences together and provide a more sustainable technological solutions in displacement settings. And the last thing I'd like to say is that we are increasingly working in urban environments. Many displaced people live in urban situations, and also a lot of camps, displacement settings are set up on the periphery of cities. We should think about how we interact and how we respond in those areas for a long-term sustainable solution for those places. We don't want to make problems for future problems to turn these displacement camps into the future slums in cities. So we have to think sustainably, and we have to think long term, and we have to work much more closely with local government, Department of Water, Utilities, Department of Sanitation, Department of Health, and municipalities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I would like to invite the speakers of Deltares to take the floor.
Yes, thank you. My name is Karen Meijer. I work with Deltares, where I lead the Water in Societal Stability program, in which we analyze the links between water, climate, and security, and also migration. And in this short presentation, I want to give a short overview of how we currently see this topic, how we look at this topic and the links between climate and migration. Could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So in this session, we discuss links between climate migration and water secure refugee settlements. And we believe that climate variability and climate change, but also how land and water are used and governed, can play a role in the decision to migrate. And of course, various other factors play a role as well. And some of those migrants can be considered refugees, but there are also many refugees that are fleeing for other reasons. But whatever the reason is to leave one's area of residence, it is important that those areas where people go to are water secure. So we see various links between water, climate, water, and migration and refugee settlements, while also being aware of the various other factors that play a role, and that these links are not so straightforward. So the next slide, please. So what we see also when we look at the literature and policy documents is that climate change, and then largely through water, so drought, water scarcity, crop failure, is considered a factor that can result in migration. And with migration here, we mean both forced and voluntary migration, or human mobility, displacement. So we refer to all of these here as migration. And this is a topic that receives a lot of attention in politics. For example, and there are many examples, but Frans Timmermans, the European Commission Vice President, mentioned in a recent report that unchecked climate change, with its devastating droughts, famines, floods, and mass dislocations, would fuel new migration waves and significantly increase the frequency and intensity of conflicts over water, arable land, and natural resources. So quite a bold statement that we see a lot in this type of discourses at the level of politicians. And there's also various reports that have estimated how many people may be displaced as a result of climate change. For example, the World Bank estimated in a report a couple of years ago that there might be 143 million people displaced internally, so not yet discussing where they would go or whether they would all come to Europe, but internally displaced persons by the year 2050 as a result of climate change. So these are also large numbers of people, and it's understandable that politicians see this as a possible threat, maybe. But if you could go to the next slide. We think that the link between climate, water, and migration is not that straightforward. There's also been many studies looking into why people migrate, and hardly anyone migrates for only climate reasons. So there may be no such thing or no such person as an actual climate refugee. Perhaps there could be some maybe coming from small island development states that may be completely flooded, but often the reason to migrate is a combination of various factors, in which climate change is one of the factors, which is also shown by the framework developed by Black and others, of which you see a picture, part of the framework in the picture on this slide. Various factors together determine the decision to move or to stay. And a very recent report actually analyzed, looking at the available evidence, that climate-related shocks can both contribute to increases but also to decreases in migration. So it can work both ways. And it's not so easy to say that climate change will lead to migration. But of course, there may be specific cases where migrants themselves have mentioned water as a reason for migration, which was the case, for example, in southern Iraq, where IOM reported that many of the displaced persons that they spoke with actually mentioned water as a reason to leave their areas of residence. So the next slide, please. So what we think is important is that we need to better understand the links between water and livelihoods and the possible response options that people have when their livelihoods decline as a result of climate change and reduced water availability, in order to be able to develop more effective policies. So it may be true that in certain cases, water forms only a small factor in the decision to migrate. However, and that is how we see it as Altares, as a water manager or as a water management researcher, we should do our best to understand the role water plays in the decision to migrate. Whether it's small or big, it's important that we understand it. And to be able to understand it, we need to have a better insight in how water and livelihood are linked, and how people make decisions at the household level or at the individual level based on several different factors, including water and climate. And with that improved insight, we can then develop better policies to provide early warnings or to support people to continue their livelihoods, to better cope with droughts or floods, and reducing the need to move to another location. And this is also what we hope that this session can bring, by looking at the different cases, to deepen our understanding of how these water and livelihoods are linked in different contexts, so that we can all learn and that we can use this knowledge to help us to develop more effective policies. This was my short presentation. I would like to hand over to my colleague, Elina, to continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. So the next step is to look at what happens when the migrants settle down. At some point, migration ends and people settle down. Next, please. So again, we need the bigger picture. We need to look at this interplay of climate, land use, the livelihoods that people have, and what makes them go for migration. But how should we go about that? Next, please. If we want to arrive at water secure settlements for refugees and IDPs, oh, this is one too many. One up, please. Yeah, we have to do, we can do integrated water resources assessment. So we look at water availability from various sources, the quality of the water in these sources, and how we can deploy that water and use it effectively, safe, and environmentally sustainable to support livelihoods in the camps as well as the surrounding areas. Next, please. The second pillar is the natural disasters assessment. Floods and droughts can be reasons for migrating, but they also should be addressed as factors that play a role in making settlements water secure. Not only those, cyclones, landslides, and other factors that are locally important can threaten the settlements once they are there. Ideally, these factors would be taken into account when deciding upon a settlement area. More often than not, the settlement simply is there at one moment, and then looking at natural disasters helps us to protect infrastructure. Next, please. No, yeah. So together, these two pillars can support the integrated service delivery. Water for livelihoods, water for wash, water for health. Knowing where the water comes from, knowing the broader context can support this integration of services and help to make it more sustainable and durable. Next, please. So results of this can be made available at the level of the river basin in spatial master plans. This is fantastic to help support the location of settlements, but also once a settlement is there, a dashboard can be made where the information from these assessments is made available to camp managers and policymakers and help and support settlements to become more water secure and support livelihoods both inside and outside the settlements. Thank you. Next.
Okay, thank you very much. Then I would like to go over to the next point, which are our interactive interviews. And I would like to start talking to Emmett Kearney from UNHCR about their experiences in Bangladesh. Emmett, can you unmute? Hi, good morning.
Can you hear me, Christopher?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Emmett, could you please set the overall context of the case study of Bangladesh? What are the main ideas to have in mind here?
Sure, Christopher, yeah. We'll get into the details, which are quite interesting in a second, but I mean, it sounds obvious, but when someone crosses a border and they're an asylum seeker or refugee, they're now being hosted by another country, by local communities, and this adds this ever layer present of complexity. So refugees often flee to countries that are themselves underdeveloped, facing their own challenges, as we just heard, and sometimes can be seen as a burden and can put further stress on scarce resources. So UNHCR's Global Compact for Refugees have outlined some of this framework for more predictable and equitable responsibility sharing, looking at sustainable solutions for refugee situations, improved collaboration. But basically, it's looking at a better collaboration with governments, international organizations, and other stakeholders to ensure that the host communities themselves get the support that they need so that refugees can lead safe and productive lives. And now we're also talking about the challenge in the humanitarian development space of, you know, in an acute emergency, when you have a large displacement, how and when do you start thinking about the long-term response? How do humanitarian actors find their way in the development space? So Cox's Bazar is a very complex context. I mean, politically, institutionally, but environmentally, technically, socially. 2017 saw one of the largest and fastest refugee displacements in recent decades. One quick note when I'm talking about we and us, when we're discussing here, this isn't UNHCR alone. We work with a broad range of stakeholders, governments, NGOs, civil society, private sector. So in this case, we really needed a rapid emergency response, but we also started to have to think for the long term as quickly as we could. So very big picture before we get into the details again. Before the 2017 influx, there was an existing refugee caseload in the Cox's Bazar area. There was about 3-to-1 host community to refugees, so 340,000 host communities, 100-some thousand refugees. Then we had 700,000+ people arrive, and that proportion switched. So now we have nearly 900,000 refugees to 300-some thousand host communities. The numbers are a bit, you know, it's a lot to digest, but I think those proportions tell you a lot. about the stress on the host community. And specifically for this conversation today, we'll be talking not about the Kutupalong mega settlement, but further south, the Teknaf Peninsula, where there is this major water stress. And here, the numbers are a bit more even, 190,000 host communities to 150,000 refugees. So a bit more host community, but again, 130,000 new refugees that arrived to a water stressed area. And there had been pre-existing water stress before. So that's what we really had to address in the emergency response.
Okay, thanks a lot. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the water situation was before all these refugees arrived in 2017 and how this has been developing over the last couple of years now?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so Teknaf is a kind of 30-kilometer long peninsula at the edge of southeastern Bangladesh and the border with Myanmar, between the Bay of Bengal and the Naf River. There's very small amounts of groundwater with a high number of failed boreholes, mainly due to the nature of the soil. And it's surrounded by the sea. So there's fears of saltwater intrusion on top of that. So we're talking about 80% surface water to groundwater use before and after the influx. Before the influx, there was already major water stress. And with the existing caseload, there were fragile systems in place to cover the needs of refugees. We had an existing surface water reservoir that was built by UNHCR and its partners way back in the 1990s that has 70,000 cubic meters of water. And this wasn't enough, so there were temporary seasonal reservoirs along the canals that were put in place to capture further surface water. And even this wasn't enough. So there was always contingency planning for potential water trucking, which was needed every couple of years to get us through the end of the dry season and provide just a basic amount of water to refugees. And maybe to note, before the 2017 influx, this was a decades-old protracted crisis with very limited resources to try to look for more ambitious or comprehensive solutions. So the 2017 influx happens. Again, 700,000 plus refugees, 130,000 into Teknaf. And we were at the end of the rainy season, and we knew we were really looking at kind of a ticking clock into 2018, into that dry season to cover the water needs in the immediate term, at the same time starting to think longer term. So our national staff were kind of on top of this. We increased the scope for contingency water trucking and needed to do that at the end of the dry season. But we're also scouting new locations for temporary dams, carried out construction of a new surface water treatment plants, and mini water networks, and looked to tap groundwater wherever we could. But as I say, naturally the refugee settlement is expanding into some forestry land, but also into host communities around villages in the area. And when I say that we're looking for new water sources, I mean, the area is already water stressed. We're not going to create something that wasn't there. The communities had already kind of taken advantage of what resources there were. So already we're pushing into this host communities space. We're starting to put further stress on resources, and we're asking these host communities who are already generously accommodating as much as they could to do even more. So we got through that 2018. We had to do some water trucking, as I said, but we knew that this couldn't be the new normal, and we really needed to start to look for bigger and broader solutions going forward.
Yeah, this sounds like a very complex situation. I mean, water trucking is also something that is very cost intensive, I can imagine, right? So what do you see as the long-term perspective in this situation, and where will this whole situation head?
Yeah, indeed. It's a life-saving measure that uses resources in the short term that could be used for the long term, right? But even in 2017, we started looking towards the long term, and we have a hydrogeologist on our team here in Geneva, part of the Geneva Technical Hub that Stuart referenced earlier, thanks to STC's support, who arrived in 2017 with Paul Bauman's team to do some geophys work in Teknaf to start to look for some potential productive sites for drilling. And then at the end of as the monsoon season started, as we got out of the dry season and that initial emergency, we really started to look towards longer term solutions in collaboration with Department of Public Health Engineering and all the other humanitarian actors. So we set up this wash sectors water technical working group, started promoting water safety plans, improving contingency plans, scaling up of those surface water dams we had found, developing water distribution systems, doing some of the soft side community outreach and water saving and use and reuse. And the first kind of major element was a technical feasibility study that we carried out with Dutch surge support for the construction of a surface water reservoir in the Shalbagan area. So the works continued in the past couple of years. We supported the government as it constructed that surface water reservoir that we designed with DSS water, along with the surface water treatment plant. We reduced some of the vulnerability by connecting some of these water systems to be able to move water from areas of surplus to shortage. Did some private sector engagement and training, scaled up the distribution systems and treatment systems, worked with local authorities on management and coordination of water systems, and dealt with COVID as that came along as well. So, I mean, the much bigger number of dams, tap stands, mini water networks, and so on. But still, despite this kind of midterm work, there's still a long way to go. We didn't need water trucking this year, but we still had to, at the end of the dry season, reduce water distribution to about 10 liters per person today, which really isn't good enough. And then really looking towards the long term, there's a couple of projects to flag, but maybe in parallel, just to note that it's complicated because we're working in close collaboration with DPHE, the government of Bangladesh, the stakeholders I mentioned. But from early on in this displacement, the government of Bangladesh has been very clear that they intend to work towards a political solution to see that these Rohingya refugees return home, right? So when we talk about long-term planning, there's a bit of cognitive dissonance there that we as humanitarians and others have to kind of walk between. And in the absence of a political solution, really the best use of our time, energy, and resources right now is the development of these long-term water resource projects that benefit refugees and host communities. Because if we imagine the day when the refugees do return home, all of the work that's been done on these projects can and will be useful for the host communities and reduce that water stress. So very quickly on those big initiatives going forward that we could spend a lot more time on, but we won't have time because I've already spoken too much. First, we're doing a more in-depth integrated water study for demand and resources. It's much broader in scope than just these camps, including host community villages, the local municipality that gets into willingness and ability to pay and so on, that gets into a complicated space with refugees again. We're carrying out a second feasibility study for even larger surface water reservoir, again with DSS water. And this is one that we wouldn't undertake to do ourselves, but we're doing it in collaboration with the government, but we would hand off this project to the government and other donors and actors. And finally, the most significant just to flag is that we've signed an MOU with the Japanese government, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in collaboration with DPHE, and a 3-year multi-million dollar water project that targets the local municipality. So it targets 80% host community, 20% refugees, and kind of the first phase. And then depending on water availability, we'll expand to cover more refugees in host community villages closer to the refugee settlements. And there's some other initiatives.
That sounds very interesting.
And I'm over my time. Thanks, Christopher.
Yeah, exactly. We have to go to the next case study now. I think this is a very interesting context. I've been in Bangladesh by myself, and I will also host the breakout rooms later with you. So let's have a little bit more in-depth discussion there. Now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Kalis Tindimugaya from the Uganda Ministry of Water and Environment. and we're going to talk about the case study of Uganda. Dr. Kallis, can you hear me? And can you unmute, please?
Yes, thank you very much, moderator. Yes, I'm
Thank you very
online.
much. Perfect.
Yes.
Dr. Kallis, can you give us a little bit of an input on the context in Uganda and what kind of challenges you are currently facing in regards to climate-induced migration?
Okay, thank you very much, moderator, and I would like to thank the organizers for giving us the opportunity. I will be giving some perspectives on Uganda, and my colleague David, working with UNHCR, will come in where possible. As some of you probably are not aware, Uganda is in the eastern part of Africa. We are hosting quite a number of refugees, up to about 1.5 million refugees. And Uganda is the third largest country to host refugees, next to Turkey and Pakistan. And when it comes to refugees, the country has an open door policy. Refugees are basically given the freedom. They enjoy the same rights as the locals. So when refugees come to the country, we make sure that we provide them the services the way we would give the refugees, the locals, and whatever is done is to ensure that the host communities and the refugees all receive the services. Most of these refugees come from South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Burundi. So the biggest number is from South Sudan, followed by Democratic Republic of Congo, and then Burundi. And the biggest number is composed of women and children. So women and girls constitute about 52%, while women and children constitute about 81%, and a few, of course, elderly people. Now, the challenges we face in this situation is that we are having degradation of environment and natural resources. So because these refugees are concentrated in specific locations where the land is available and where the environment is seen to be favorable, then we are having degradation of water resources. So we are having challenges with the availability of water in some of these areas because of the pressure of the people. Then you find that the boreholes that have been drilled in those areas are being pumped heavily, and you find that the water levels are going down. Because also we have sanitation facilities together with water supplies, then the quality becomes a problem. We have degradation of forests. People need trees for buildings and also firewood. So you find that many of the areas actually highly deforested. Then because people are living close to wetlands and productive land, so you find that these natural resources are degraded. So we are having challenges of water scarcity in many of these areas. And of course, water security becomes a challenge, and of course, sustainable development. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Now, Dr. Kallis, could you please kind of follow up on these kind of pressures? Like, how is the government of Uganda and UNHCR together working on responding to these pressures on natural resources?
Well, thank you very much. In Uganda, we actually work very, very closely with UNHCR. So if you don't mind, I could request my colleague David just come in for purposes of giving the perspective. We work together very closely. So David, if you're online, I think you can come in at this moment and supplement.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Karist. A broad-based stakeholder engagement approach has been adopted by the government of Uganda and UNHCR, and it leverages on divergent capacity of development and humanitarian stakeholders in the refugee response. So we are following up on the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework and the Global Compact for Refugees, and a water and environment sector response plan for refugees and hosting communities has been developed under the leadership of the Ministry of Water and Environment, and which addresses the need for water, sanitation, and environmental protection among the refugees and the host communities. Refugees have also been included into the National Development Plan 3, which runs from 2020 to 2025. This provides a long-term view of hosting refugees, which brings perspective into the fore, enabling identification of the risk and instituting appropriate mitigation measures. In addition, it is enabling leveraging on development initiatives that serves the hosting regions, the refugee hosting regions, during and after the refugees find durable solution. A number of development projects that are designed in the country therefore target both the refugees and the hosting population.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gisiri from UNHCR. Mr. Kallis, do you have anything to add to this?
Well, as David has mentioned, of course, we recognize that we have a number of players that are involved in this work. The issue of coordination has been a big challenge, and also getting the humanitarian players to work with the development players. Traditionally, you would find that those who are working in the humanitarian development space are really not collaborating with those who are working in the development agenda. So this is something we have tried to bring together through the response framework for water and environment, so that we integrate interventions on water and environment, irrespective of whether they are being implemented by the humanitarian agencies or the normal development partners. And I think we have made some quite good progress in this regard, and we can only do better. And again, that's why the Ministry of Water and Environment collaborates very, very closely with the UNHCR, something that we were not doing previously before the response framework and plan was developed.
So this sounds like a very interesting process you're actually working on. I mean, it's quite a large-scale transition between non-governmental actors like UNHCR and the government of Uganda, of where you have the transition of the management of these water services, basically from UNHCR to the government. And such a large-scale transition requires a lot of coordination by all these involved actors, like the government and non-state actors. And I would really like to know, like, how this transition process is progressing. What are the current challenges that you're facing, and what do you see for the future now for this case in Uganda?
Thank you very much again. We have been able to develop a response coordination framework where we bring the different players to work together. We have government agencies working with UN agencies, working with the civil society, working with the local governments, and that has helped. And this coordination framework has actually been embedded in the Ministry of Water and Environment. So we also have a specific secretariat within the Ministry of Water and Environment to coordinate the implementation of the water and environment refugee framework and plan. And because of the secretariat and also because of this group we have created within the ministry and the sector in general, a group that looks at issues of refugees. While we have been having groups looking at issues of sanitation, integrated water resources management, water supply and sanitation, we have now a specific group involving the different stakeholders which take care of these issues. And the secretariat now is helping to keep track of our implementation of this framework. But also we have also tried to move the management of water utilities, water supply and sanitation services in refugee settlements. We are handing them over to utilities, and the government now is developing guidance on how we can gazette some of these schemes to gazetted utilities within the country. Maybe David can supplement, if you don't mind, David.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. I think we'll have some further discussions later on in the breakout rooms. Thank you very much, Dr. Kallis, and thank you very much, David. I would like to now open the floor for Dr. Julia Smith-Omomo from IOM, where we will now talk a little bit about the case study of Iraq. Very warm welcome. Julia, could you please give us some input on the context IOM is working on in Iraq and what kind of challenges you are currently facing when it comes to climate-induced migration?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see a lot of linkages between climate-induced displacement and slow onset environmental change. So as one of your colleagues said, water is really one of the most explicit reasons for for displacement. Actually, I think in Iraq, it quite often is cited as a primary reason for displacement, usually to urban areas. In Iraq, the main sources of irrigation for agricultural livelihoods, for example, is the Tigris and Euphrates River, and there's an intermediary body in between them, which is a lake, which serves as a transportation sort of storage vehicle for water between the two areas. And actually, one of the biggest risks to agricultural livelihoods is the inflow or the hydraulic infrastructure that's being built in countries beyond Iraq's borders. So in countries like Turkey and Iran, as they continue developing and using those water sources, there's a reduction in the available water coming from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers into the local irrigation canals, which is affecting agricultural livelihoods across Iraq right now. IOM has partnered with Deltares in the last couple of years to do some modeling, which has actually found that even if there's an investment in sort of individual irrigation systems, in the sort of increase in the amount of arable land, for example, that is irrigated, it could actually cause a supply gap in the amount of available water. So what happens is that the agricultural farmlands, when they don't have enough water in the dams or in the irrigation canals, they're actually encouraged by local authorities to not even plant some of their land. So much of that land does lay fallow, and in villages across Iraq, as you visit them, you'll see them sort of half deserted. And even if the intentions to remain or migrate are surveyed, you see quite a large amount of the population starting to have the intention to leave. So there's a real sort of shift, almost like a communal cause for migration, where people see their neighbors leaving and they start to question, well, if they are, I will need to eventually. And it almost becomes an economic barrier to migrate to a city, because families will wait to hear about either an economic opportunity in a city, or they will sort of rely on an affiliation with a tribal leader or somebody who can connect them to an opportunity in order for them to desert their farmland. But there is quite a lot of a pessimism about the future of agriculture in some of these communities in Iraq, because even the worth of their assets are sort of decreasing as their farmland lays fallow, and it loses its value as people, there's not a lot of buyers on the market even for the land, so people are reduced to their livestock being their primary asset. And once they sell their livestock, which is a coping mechanism used by many families, then they will be sort of, oftentimes moved to urban centers to work as daily workers in construction industries, where agriculture is no longer their primary livelihood. But another viable opportunity, or another common result, is that families will end up as daily wage laborers on another farm's land, basically. And here you have basically daily laborers who live in tents or temporary accommodation on farmlands, who are responsible for their own upkeep until the harvest is sold. So it's a sort of precarious situation, and especially when they move to urban areas, oftentimes because of the tribal affiliations and the networks that they have with families who have some people in these urban areas, they're sort of unofficially allowed to live on agricultural lands, for example. You have informal settlements in Basra. It's estimated that there are between 300 to 350,000 people living in informal neighborhoods. So obviously then you're lacking the extension of social services to these agricultural lands. You're lacking proper land and housing documentation for these agricultural lands because they're not supposed to be residential. You're lacking the availability of even offering them individual assistance. Sometimes because of the sort of paperwork and regulatory challenges that this presents in creating, the due diligence that that organizations would need to support these individuals. They have displacement histories, they have no documentation, and oftentimes they can't even contribute, for example, with matching assets or something.
Wow, this sounds really complex and quite like a prime example for a water-stressed environment. Dr. Smith-Omomo, could you please kind of tell us the role of IOM in this context and how you're trying to kind of respond to these challenges that you just mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will also mention that I think in 2019, IOM did identify around 21,000 individuals who had been displaced by water. Oftentimes as well, just because of the way that the public employment sector is set up, the people that remain in these agricultural communities are those with public sector employment, and the people who leave are the ones with agricultural livelihoods. So they're displaced to an urban area where their background is even not suitable to the local labor market, which may only have opportunities, for example, in construction. So what IOM Iraq does is try and promote market-led development, where we do a sort of assessment of the labor market in the areas in which we intervene. We provide individual level assistance, where we identify vulnerable individuals so we can help with microgrants of 1,500 to 1,700. And we also provide what we call our flagship private sector initiative, the Enterprise Development Fund, which offers grants of $5,000 to $30,000 in funding. So we offer that in areas like Sinjar, where agricultural returnees are not able to return because their farmlands are not irrigated. And we offer EDF agriculture, which is a specific brand of EDF that can also have a small budget line for an individual irrigation system. But we're aware that these are sort of band-aids. I think, like Emmett was saying, there's a sort of disconnect between long-term planning and individual usage, because as we know, the most important thing would be the transboundary inflow issues to address, and the improved irrigation efficiency. So what we want to start getting more into is promoting more efficient irrigation practices, not just sort of surface flooding, and also building in there. We have some infrastructure support to communities. We do have our team of engineers who do things like water treatment plant restoration and desalination projects to address water quality issues. Okay, thanks a lot. We are actually at the end of our time for our interactive interviews. Thank you very much. This sounds very interesting. We have now 3 breakout rooms, each one of them dealing with a different context. So there will be one about Bangladesh dealing with water security and WASH. There will be another dealing with the Iraq case study about climate migration and water security, and a third breakout room about Uganda talking about water security and WASH. And I would like now the organizers to organize the breakout rooms. It will be a session which lasts for half an hour. So we will end the breakout rooms at 11:50. And let's hope to have a really interesting discussion there. You can now choose which breakout room you want to join. Thanks, and see you later.
Others who weren't in their small group. So yeah, any questions, please let us know. Yeah, well, I think what did we talk about? Oh yes, we talked a bit about the connection between some of the work the humanitarian actors are doing and the development work that's ongoing in Bangladesh. I mean, just the fact that we're not, oftentimes humanitarians set up these parallel systems and there isn't this vision or connection to the national government's efforts for development. In this case, we are quite attuned to what's going on because we work closely with the Department of Public Health Engineering and know of their initiatives with the economic zones, the tourist zones funded by ADB. And as Didier was mentioning in the group, both ADB and World Bank have been involved in the response itself to varying degrees and in various technical domains. So I think this is an area where the humanitarians are kind of plugging into the wider development initiatives as much as possible. And as you were saying, Christopher, we don't know when / if this refugee population will go back to Myanmar. I mean, it doesn't look promising at the moment, but I think that's why it's important, first of all, that we connect to these development initiatives, but also that our work is seen through a lens of complementarity and something that can be left standing if and when this refugee community returns. So these surface water reservoirs that are being looked at can still be used, right? The government will be involved in taking over the operation and maintenance of these. So I think that was a bit the spirit of what we were talking about, and we started to shift to wash, sanitation, and hygiene, but I think I'm probably near my 2 minutes, so I'll make space for others to jump in. Maybe we
Emmett, you're very right. This was 2 minutes. Does anyone in this audience have a question regarding the Uganda case study? We have now 2 minutes. I would say we combine, just following up on the program, we would have later on until 11:56 to actually present the outcomes of the breakout groups. Now, since the breakout groups have been cut short, I would suggest we just use this time for discussion. Now, I would like to hear if anyone has a follow-up or a question on the Bangladesh case study. Very short, one question only, please. If you have a question, you can just unmute it, please.
It's the curse of being so comprehensive and clear.
Exactly. I mean, this sounds like we have answered all the questions. This is perfect. Now, I would like to follow up with Dr. Kallist and David. Could you please follow up on the Uganda case study and what you have been discussing about, please?
Thank you very much. The case study we discussed, we started by discussing the lessons we have learned over the years, and some of the lessons we have learned is improved coordination. Previously, we would find that activities being done by humanitarian agencies were not linked at all to the development work being done by the development agencies. And the collaboration with the government agencies, especially those related to sectoral activities like water, sanitation, and environment, was not good. But when we developed the water and environment response plan, then the coordination and the collaboration was improved because we have committees, we have a secretariat that brings us together, but also the plan itself enabled us to have a common purpose and a common framework. Then the issue, of course, is that one has enabled us to leverage resources from government, from the development partners, from the civil society, and also from the local governments. So that's one of the experiences we have learned, that really the involvement of government has really been very, very strong, and the collaboration has been good. David, maybe you can supplement what you put up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Yes, I think you've summarized it very, very well. I think mine is just to add on the emerging role of the development partners in bridging this humanitarian development nexus and assisting in getting long-term resources into these regions that are quite remote and marginalized, and helping investments that go into the future beyond when the refugees will have maybe find durable solutions. And now working with the utilities that are taking over this management of some of these services, and these utilities are going to be there for long. So the investments being made are going to be useful both for the refugees now and also for the future development of the country. Back to you, Dr. Kallist.
Thank you very much. I think we also want to highlight the role the Water Youth Network has been playing here. And I want to ask the Water Youth Network volunteer that has been taking notes in the group about Uganda to actually fill in a little bit about the discussion and maybe also share your view on this take. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll just briefly, I think, add on what Dr. Kallist and David have shared. in Uganda, it was good to understand that the refugees are involved actually in their own development process. There is a structure, they are part of, for example, the water user committees in those areas. And also being that we do not know when exactly the refugees will leave the country, they're also encouraged to also engage in many development projects for their own livelihood improvement. I think that was very specific from the Uganda breakout session.
Perfect. Thank you very much for following up. Are there any short questions? My emphasis is on short, on the Uganda case study. If so, then please unmute.
Hi. I already wrote the question. I was wondering, like, is the water security issue only related with refugees, or does it also affect the host community and it leads them to migrate into other regions within Uganda or outside Uganda? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can someone from Uganda please follow up?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Yes, water security issues are not restricted to refugees alone. And that's why our programs are geared towards supporting refugees and host communities. One of the things, of course, we noted previously was that whenever refugees would come to Uganda, they would get better services than the host communities. And this was already causing challenges, conflicts. So right now, we recognize that the host communities have challenges, water security challenges like the refugees in many areas. So our programs are targeting both so that the services can actually be shared and we don't have any group that is disadvantaged. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I ask Dr. Smith-Omomo to fill us in on this a little bit, together with the volunteer from the Water Use Network, on what has been discussed in the group about your case study?
Sure. We just had a few questions and a couple of technical issues, but the questions, I think, we're looking at the divisions between who stays and who leaves and what the financing arrangements look like, I think, from a public sector perspective of how to improve public water supply systems. Because in my earlier speech, I had focused on individual irrigation upgrades. And I think I hadn't quite finished the point about the financing for public water supply systems. IOM tries to support what the local municipality is often trying to work on. For example, in Diala, there's been sort of the drying up of the irrigation canal, and local authorities have tried to dig about 6 boreholes, basically to reconstitute the inflow to the water treatment plant, whereas the local population has been relying on water trucking to meet their water needs. And this really, leads a lot of people to start talking about when am I going to migrate, not if. So this is a situation where IOM would look at the situation. Obviously, we don't have influence over the budget that's submitted to Parliament, which would have the trickle-down effect or allocations for local water systems upgrades, but we can certainly support with external donor financing to identify community areas of priority intervention and support through either infrastructure upgrades, engineering assistance, and we'll do community level infrastructure projects to support public water supply systems as well as the individual level ones.
Perfect. That sounds interesting. Can we have an update from the Water Use Network volunteer from your group, please?
Yeah, just to add a few more information from our discussion. Water security is the primary issue in forcing these people to move, but the other issues as well is, like, the Iraq normally allocates large budget to public sector and government offices, so that will leave the private sector stranded. So that means that people working in the private sector are forced to decide to live or stay in those areas. In addition to that, also economic and cultural factors, rainfall fluctuation, and insufficient water infrastructures contribute to this migration. And so IOM and also other organizations working there, they support by building or repairing those infrastructures to build a better system for the community. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Sorry, yeah. If anyone has a question for the Iraq case study, please speak up. We have a little bit of time left for some questions now.
There's a question.
Good morning, everyone.
In chat section. Okay.
I think, can you hear me?
Yes, Enrico, please go ahead,
Okay.
and afterwards we'll review the question in the chat box.
Okay, I think I posted also in the chat box. I'm not sure if to everyone or to only one specific person. Anyway, it was interesting to hear in the Iraq case that the development of irrigation infrastructures in countries bordering with Iraq might hinder availability of water resources. For instance, development of irrigation infrastructure in Iran might cause problems in water availability in Iraq. I wonder if there is any dialogue between the countries about water issues and these water issues.
I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that question. I primarily work on private sector development. We do have within IOM the integrated or the migration management unit. One push of theirs in previous years was integrated border management. I'd be happy to look into that and get back to you, unless maybe my colleague Antonio has an answer to that question. But personally, I'm not aware of talks like that.
I'm also not aware of that discussion, but I understand that the issue is something that needs to be discussed between upstream countries and downstream country like Iraq. And it's not only happening there, but in many other areas in MENA region that are affected by this the overuse of water resources in countries upstream without considering the problems or the impacts that it will have to countries downstream in terms of the access to water and water with quality. But specifically about the talks that have been had between Iraq and the neighboring countries, I also cannot provide an answer now, but we'll be happy to follow up with my colleagues and see whether there is any feedback. Yeah, thank you.
Maybe I can also suggest that you just note down the names of the people that you've been talking to or the speakers, and then just try to get in touch with them afterwards, or that the respective speakers can also put their email address in the chat box, so to have direct access for any further follow-up questions. Was there another question for IOM? Otherwise, I would like to go to and ask the water use network volunteer for the Bangladesh case study to round this thing up and tell us if there's something that Emmet and Dave about with the participants that we did forget to mention maybe. Could you please unmute and share your thoughts?
Sure. So key lights from our breakout room was that there are certainly two main projects in the Bangladesh case. One is from the Japanese Ministry of Forestry, and then another one is from the Bangladesh government. And then they do have a long-term strategy and hope for the future. And then what UNHCR are doing now is that they are trying to work with the community on the water conservation project involving the people who doesn't have enough experience in wash and hygiene knowledge. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. This is great. Now we are coming to the end of our session. Is there any last remarks from any one of the speakers? If so, please unmute now. You have 1 minute to speak.
No, just a quick thanks to Deltaris for organizing, Christopher for sharing very ably and being nimble to convert to a plenary session. So thanks for everybody's contributions.
Yeah, I would also like to thank the organizers for this. Certainly we have run a lot. We are not yet there. There is a lot that we need to do. So the experiences shared here certainly are going to improve the way we are doing things. And we hope that we'll continue getting such opportunities to learn from each other. Thank you very much.
Just to then, I guess, add on and say, it's really good to have opportunities like this to exchange country level experiences, because we can certainly learn from the experiences of what other agencies and government initiatives are learning. So thank you very much for organizing and inviting us.
Perfect. Thanks a lot to everyone. I hope at least, although the time was so short, we gave some interesting input on all these different case studies and sparked some discussions that hopefully will continue after our session is ending. And I hope that in the future we'll have even more possibilities to discuss about these topics, which are so pressing and urgent. I also want to thank Judy Blau from Deltaris for all the work she has put into. I know it's not been easy, and sorry again for the technical difficulties. I hope we could anyway have a little bit of a group discussion, as this session was supposed to be super or highly interactive, as they called it. Thanks a lot to everyone. I wish all of you a very nice day. We finish right on time like a Swiss watch. And yeah, hope to see you all in the future. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. Bye.